Hey everyone, Ashley Mailloux and Gino Buccola here with a special stakes preview. The day that we all look forward to is the first Saturday in May. It's the Kentucky Derby, race number 13 of 14 this Saturday at Churchill Downs, a mile and a quarter, 3-year-olds in the spotlight, Gino. And this is what we want to see, right? A field of 20. There are those two also eligibles on the outside, but a loaded field with horses that obviously have a variety of running styles. The draw was just done a couple days ago, and people talk about the draw, and I'm curious, your thoughts on it. I think it's somewhat important, but I think people really stress it maybe more than necessary at times.
Yeah, I agree because every race and all of the horses in each race have different running styles. So you have to take all of that into account. What's going to happen in each of those races and how it will impact it. So it's hard to use stats through the years because I think each year you want to treat as its own. This year, what's really fun, Ashley, is the top two morning line betting choices. They could not be more polar opposites from their running styles, right? We have Fierceness to the outside, who's installed as the 5-2 morning line favorite, and he wants to be close. He wants to be forward. He doesn't really like it if he, has to get behind horses or if he doesn't get the ideal trip. When he gets that trip, he probably has the highest ceiling of anyone. And then you have Sierra Leone, who's the polar opposite, right? He's going to be kind of launching from way out of it.
And they drew very differently. Sierra Leone with post 217 for Fierceness. Japan's well represented here with a couple of runners, Forever Young, Tio Password. We have horses from East Coast, West Coast, everything. This is the Derby that you would like to see in the field, that you'd like to see. And one thing that we always talk about in the Derby is the pace. And as we look at the Timeform US pace projections, a fast pace is projected. I don't think that's shocking, Gio, just looking at historically at the Derby. Position means a lot, right? Everyone talks about you have, if you're a horse, 19 other rivals, you have to get in a good position. Sometimes we see horses maybe try to change their running style on the big day, but obviously you're going to have horses that gravitate towards being forwardly placed. And as we look at these leaders here, just a touch from post 8, Track Phantom, both horses that have been forward. And even with the inside runner, Dornock, I know last time on the bluegrass, he necessarily wasn't on the lead, but go to his win streak. He likes to be kind of alert and forward from the gate.
Yeah, I don't know if he really wants to pass horses either. So sometimes when you get a draw like the inside draw or the extreme outside, sometimes it can be like a blessing in disguise because it really just tips the hand of what you have to do. I think for Dornock, the plan is probably going to be simple. Let's just use as much speed as we can to try to get out of some traffic early, and that sometimes having a speed horse down inside could really make this pace even a little faster because we know he's got to go down there to try to get a good position.
You don't see the LP flag anywhere because those horses, their chicklets, aren't represented here. The 2, Sierra Leone, and 7, Honor Marie, both deep closers in this field. So you don't see them there, as I mentioned, on the chicklets, but you can see basically most of the field represented there. So we'll dive right into it here, Gino. We talked about Dornock maybe being a horse that doesn't necessarily like to pass runners. He had a win streak coming into the bluegrass, but at Keeneland, in terms of that trip, he wasn't as forward from the gate. And for him, I think that was where he needed to take another step forward, and he failed to do so.
Yeah, he was a horse who showed a lot of precocity early on in his career, and we see horses like this every year who may just have been a little farther along than some of his rivals. Then he just hasn't seemed like he's taken another step forward, right? As he's progressed to 3 now, and as you pointed out, it's not as if his trip was all that bad. Like he was saving ground down inside, he was fourth, and he just couldn't go on with it. I don't really like the draw, and I just haven't seen enough progression from him. So I think for me, part of a pace battle in here, but not really going to be in the mix.
We're talking about the bluegrass. The number 2, Sierra Leone, was the winner of that race. And as we take a look at the replay here, I mean, we've talked about this horse's running style. He comes from the clouds, but the way he does it, Gino, I mean, he is a freak of nature. His late turn of foot, he explodes, and he keeps on going here. And he's a horse that just relishes, the longer trips, the longer distances.
Yeah, he's a really cool horse, and I think he's the horse to beat. I think he's the one they will all have to hold off, and I'm pretty confident that he will be launching a late rally. Will it be good enough to win? We'll see on Saturday, but he always shows up. He always gives you that big late rally, and the one time he was defeated, it was on a seriously biased racetrack where he actually made a move and took the lead, and we saw how good the inside was when Dornick was able to battle back from the rail down inside. So I think he's the one they will all have to hold off. I have no knocks for him. And I think when we get to our selections, you and I kind of feel similarly that he's like a really, really strong player in here.
Very, very, very talented son of Gunrunner. Now, the next up in the field is the number 3, Mystic Dan. This one out of the Kenny McPeak barn. Now, he was 3rd in the Arkansas Derby, but the Southwest I thought was a very good performance. We will actually show that replay here at Oaklawn. Yes, the track was sloppy. It was muddy. There's a lot of moisture here in this surface, but the way that he's going to take off here, he really relished this surface. And that also raises the question, Gino, the weather forecast. We know it's the first Saturday in May. There is talk of potential rainfall. I mean, I just thought visually this was impressive. You can maybe say the Beyer was inflated. Was it not? Was it? I'm not sure. I don't want to get into that argument, but I did think his Southwest was certainly a race that gives him maybe a little bit of a longer look here.
Yeah, what it shows you is he has a really high ceiling. Which is nice that under ideal circumstances, he's capable of putting up a bigger race than we've seen from most of these runners. So that has to be a major factor for him. If you're someone that likes Mystic Dan, I'm just a little kind of curious what kind of trip they want, what exactly his best running style is going to be. It's not that I really have a bunch of knocks on him and his price will be fine. I just can't really figure out how the race projects for him to win. So for me, just a little bit more of an under type.
The 4, Catching Freedom. Up next, this one trained by Brad Cox. Flavien Prat has the Mountain. This duo teamed up in the Louisiana Derby, and talk about a big performance. I think when it came down to his trip, Gino, this wasn't the trip that they wanted. He's more of a mid-pack type horse. And where did he find himself? He found himself dead last on his biggest race at this point. And the way that he was able to tip out and make up ground, I think really speaks to his ability.
Yeah, and you pointed out something that's really important. I feel like the conversation around him sometimes gets a little bit lost in that he is not a deep closer. He is not a horse that has to come from dead last. And when you watch a lot of his races, he's much more tactical. He can sit 3 to 4 lengths off towards the back of like early leading groups. And that's what I like about him in this race, that he does not need to be 18th, 19th, 20th in the field where Sierra Leone might be. And that could maybe be the difference with horses like this in a race like this with all sorts of traffic and all sorts of variables. I was more and more impressed watching his races back, Ashley, and I just love the progression he has coming into this race. He steps forward little by little to where it makes you feel like he can keep stepping forward in each of his races. I don't worry about him having his career best and maybe he's going to regress off of that. I don't really have anything to knock on him at all. He's going to be in all of my exotics, and I like Catching Freedom a lot on Saturday.
And I agree with you. It's all about the progression of these horses. And I think something that gets lost sometimes, it's not necessarily that the best horse wins the Derby. It comes down to trip. It comes to that day specifically. So a lot of variables there. Now, next in the field is the number 4, Catalytic. This one trained by Saffie Joseph Jr. You look at his progression. He was able to win on debut. He was second next time out, facing winners for the first time. Put him right in the Florida Derby, and he simply was second best behind Fierceness. I was curious to get your thoughts on that. I thought, all in all, yes, he was well defeated, but he was clear of Grandmo the first. And talk about a horse that really had to stretch out in distance. We're talking about a horse that went from 6.5 to 6, to a mile and an eighth. That's not easy for any racehorse.
Yeah, so you feel like this race now, second time going longer, there'll be a lot more foundation, a lot more stamina for him to take a step forward. I just think that's going to have to be a really big step forward in here. I could see him as a bit of a pace factor and maybe more of an underneath horse, but he will really need to improve to turn the tables on Fierceness and many others in here.
The legend Dwayne Lucas sends out the number 6, Just Steel, Keith Asmussen in the irons. Now, this is kind of a duo to watch at Oaklawn Park. They teamed up last time with this runner in the Grade 1 Arkansas Derby. He was in front of Mystic Dan, and he was clear of Mystic Dan. He was only 2 lengths behind the winner, Muth, and he got that tactical trip where he's quite close to the pace, and he tried to make a run, but Muth was just the best against that group. And I think the conversation with him is maybe like a maybe you don't, but from a pace perspective, you have to think he might be in, I don't know, the top 5 or 6 horses early on.
Yeah, and what's nice about him in very Dwayne Lucas style, he has the most races of any horse in the field. So he has a stamina edge probably on most of these and a really, really nice foundation when you're going longer and when you're going distance that these horses have never gone before, and a lot of them don't want to go. So his 5 of his last 6 races have been pretty good. Yeah, I have less knocks on him overall, and his price should be pretty fair. He's capable of throwing up some pretty high buyer speed figures as well. So Just Steel, yeah, he's a player.
The 7, Honor Marie, up next is son of Honor Code, which have to love these connections. Ben Curtis came to the States, had a very good meet at the fairgrounds. I believe he finished 4th in the jockey standings. Whitworth Beckman, a young trainer trying to, get more horses in his barn. And A nice colt that they have who's proven at Churchill. I think that's a key thing with him, Gino. You look at his big win in the Kentucky Jockey Club. I mean, he won very nicely, this horse. I think the one thing maybe works against him, it's the same thing that people talk about Sierra Leone. He's going to close from off of it.
Yeah, he's a real buzzy horse right now too, because he's reportedly doing very well in the mornings. And you look at his overall form, it all really makes sense. Ashley, he has 2 races so far this year. He took a big step forward from the first start to the second start. That Risen Star, he was behind 3 next out Derby prep winners. That was the strongest of any of the Derby preps that day. And now, can he take one more step forward? Third start of the form cycle. I think he's going to be a horse that gets bet a little bit, just from the sense that I hear of like a lot of people that are high on him. But I'm warming up to him more and more, because he's another one that he's moving in a really positive direction.
Yeah, entering this race off his career best buyer, which it wasn't a win, but it was a 96. And obviously he got a strong 92 in his most recent win, which came locally at Churchill. The 8 just a touch up next. Brad Cox, well represented in this race. Now, this horse was part of that pace scenario in the Bluegrass and just second best, could not hold off that charge from Sierra Leone. I think we saw with the time form pace projections, a horse that figures to be forward in here. And you look at the performances, just has that one win, but has still been able to hang around for sort of those minor shares in those other 2 outings.
Yeah, he's really lightly raced, and he's one that you feel like just takes step forward from each of his races. He's done no wrong so far, and I think he's a one that a lot of people are projecting just getting a great trip, just behind the leaders, the sort of the kind of magical Kentucky Derby trip that we all are hoping for, where you're not right on the lead, you're kind of sitting behind it. Maybe you can stay in the clear. That's how I play the Derby a lot of times. In particular, you were hitting on that. We're looking for a style, because this race is so unique with the 20 horses and all the different things that can happen. It's not just looking for the best horse, it's who can adapt and who can find different ways to win. This horse could keep himself out of a lot of traffic, and I would not be shocked at all to see him right around the wire late.
So we talked about the Bluegrass, sort of the last kind of way to get into the starting gate in terms of points is the Lexington, also at Keeneland in the 9. Encino was the winner of this year's event, and he took them gate to wire. It was his first dirt start, which I think Gino maybe raised some questions around this colt. His pedigree suggests that he would have been fine, but he had to take them gate to wire and got tested there. He took a little bit of a step forward, and he's another horse with each and every single start. He's made that progression. The question for him is, at this point, has he faced the same level of competition as the others? I think his past performances suggest that he has not, but you can't knock what he's done so far.
Yeah, again, that's we can say a lot of similar things about some of these horses. You have to sort of just pick and choose the ones that you think could get the best trips at the right prices. And I have no really bad things to say about Encino and his body of work, but you were kind of hitting on a thought I was maybe formulating. It just doesn't seem like he's as proven resume wise. I need to see him do it against better horses.
And hey, we know the Derby can have upsets, so we're not knocking him by any means. But when you start to look at a 20-horse field, you have to start to look at what angles work for you. Now, up next is the 10, Tio Password, one of 2 in the field for Japan. And this horse is lightly raced, just 2 races under his belt. Had one at the beginning of the year back in January. Then we saw him in March 23rd, and he's been impressive in both of them. I think it's always the question, how do these horses fare when they come stateside? It's a different sort of, race day experience. There's a lot of different factors, but interesting to see this one here, and Kazushi Kimura with another Derby mount.
Yeah, just such a wild card here too, with only the 2 races. For someone who likes to watch replays, for example, with Forever Young, you can get a better feel for the horse in watching the 5 races and a couple of the races where they stack up against horses that have races against other American horses. So you can kind of get a sense for some sort of form. This horse is such a wild card for me. I really wish I could give you more, but I have no idea what to expect other than probably some speed from this one. So I think that's where you'll probably see this one involved early on, but I'm taking a real wait and see approach here.
We talked about the Japanese runners just in general making a big impact stateside, whether it's Breeders' Cup, now with Derby runners, a lot to look forward to. And their other chance draws directly to his outside the 11, Forever Young, who, as you mentioned, has a little bit more of a resume in terms of races. But look at him, another horse, undefeated, 5 for 5 so far in his career. They took him to Saudi, won the Saudi Derby. Then off of that, I thought was visually pretty impressive in the UAE Derby, where I think in terms of what we saw, he had to stretch out to 1 mile and 3/16, and he seemed to relish up the distance.
Yeah, and what you'll notice if you watch his last two races is he had really wide trips where he was sitting like 3 deep, 4 deep. I made a note; those are kind of Kentucky Derby trips. Those reminded me of the types of trips you may have to get in the Derby, where you're wide, and that's a little bit better than maybe being shuffled behind horses and stuck behind. This is a really nice animal, and I'm gonna have him in a lot of my exotics. I'm very curious to see the type of money that comes in for him because I feel like he was catching a lot of buzz like earlier in the prep season. And as of late, I don't feel like there's as much support for him, but he is a very, very nice horse. And I think he can be adaptable. Like we're saying, he's a horse who I think can show different running styles that could really help in this race.
The 12 track Phantom is going to wear blinkers for the first time in his career, which is an interesting move. Sometimes, Gino, we don't see the equipment changes before the big day. Other times we do see them. And Steve Asmussen has decided to put him on a colt who typically is quite forward. Now, typically he is kind of first out of the gate, but there's been a couple of circumstances where he's had a target for maybe a quarter of a mile in front of him. And his last two, he's coming in here off of defeats. One in the Risen Star. They kept him, though, in the fairgrounds because he's had so much success down there. And then they put him in the Louisiana Derby and he was fourth best, beaten by 2.5. I think with both of those performances, though, he didn't really do anything wrong. He just got caught by other horses there, and he can be very game on the front end. But the question is, with other challengers, with other pace pressure, how's he going to handle the mile and a quarter distance?
Yeah, the positive for him versus some of maybe the other horses that are pace players is he's continuing to step forward on speed figures as well. He's just running into tough horses that might be a little better suited at the distances, but he is running good races and better races and continuing to improve. Whereas maybe a horse like Dornick may have hit a ceiling already last year and we're not seeing that much improvement and progression. I do think this is a horse that I can warm up to using in bottom of tries and bottom of supers. I'm just so concerned about the fact that we haven't seen him sit off more before Ashley. And then with the running style and then adding the blinkers, he feels like he's going to be keyed up and trying to go early.
Next in the fields at 13, West Saratoga. Great story here as well. An $11,000 purchase now in the Kentucky Derby starting gate. And he was the runner up in the Jeff Ruby Stakes. He could not beat endlessly in there, but he got a nice trip, I thought, in that race and was just second best. And he has plenty of race day experience. Look at him. They tried him anywhere from 4.5 to a mile and an eighth now. And he's very, very consistent. And, it's a curious sort of situation for him, the sort of trip that he'll get, because I have a feeling he's another one that at least figures to be closer than a lot of runners that we've talked about so far.
Yeah, the problem is just looking at his recent races, like he hasn't been close since the Iroquois win. He's been beaten at least 4 lengths in all of his recent races. And if you're using a measuring stick horse, we just talked about Forever Young, he and Bookham Dano were right on the wire in the Saudi Cup. And if you're looking in the Saudi Derby, and if you're looking at West Saratoga, he was defeated by 12 lengths by the very same Bookham Dano. So playing that common rival game, he just seems like he's a cut below.
And we talked about endlessly was the winner of the Jeff Ruby Stakes. Next in the field is from post 14. This horse has been interesting for a couple of reasons. Obviously, he started on the turf, was 3 for 3, had a defeat on Breeders' Cup weekend, and then he's won his 2 lone appearances now as a 3-year-old. But again, started on turf and now has been on the synthetic. And the other conversation, Gino, was there was a lot of questions whether we would even see him entered in the Derby because this will be his first time trying the dirt. But the connections decided to go ahead with it. He does have 2 strong works, and from a times perspective coming in here, to me though, it's a big question when you have horses that are certainly proven over the surface.
Yeah, at a price of 30 to 1 or so, I could include him in some of the bottom of the exotics because he's just so good right now, and because that is such an X factor. Like he keeps stepping forward. He's only run the 1 bad race in the Breeders' Cup, and if he does take to the Churchill track, he isn't far off from competing with a lot of these, and he could be passing horses late. And from a class standpoint, he's showed up in all of his races and run really well. So yeah, not a whole lot of knocks on him, and we have seen horses with this synthetic turf form take very well to the Churchill layout in particular. So, I could make a case for him at a big price.
And talking about horses in good form, I feel like Domestic Product is in the same sense. I think he's going to be a little bit of a wild card here, probably offer value on the tote board. And we'll take a look at his most recent win, which was this is gritty. I mean, this is a really, really tight race when we watch this stretch run here of the Grade 3 Tampa Bay Derby. He was second in the Holy Bull before that at Gulfstream behind Hades, but he's going to duke it out here with No More Time, who took a lot of love in this race, obviously coming in through a prep race at Tampa Bay Downs. And this horse gets up in time and really surges late, Gino. And I know his figures are light in a spot like this, but you're talking about Chad, you're talking about Arado Ortiz Jr. climbing aboard this horse for the first time. I think he has some upside in the sense that we've only seen him twice this year. He took a step forward. He seemed to get over the ground at Tampa well. Now he'll have to adjust to Churchill. But the other part of it is he's a horse that I know the times have been on the slower side. So it's hard to say how close he'll be to it. But I could see him getting a really good trip maybe from mid pack.
Yeah, he outfinished Fierceness also, who's going to be a much shorter price than him in the Holy Bull when he was second that day. And he's a horse who, if he is close to the price that he is on the morning line, and maybe he gets some of the money because of the connections, but this race is bet a little different than other races. So if he is up there and 25 to 1 and above, that's probably pretty fair for a horse like him. And, just expecting and hoping for some improvement there because he is so lightly raced and he's in great hands.
Another horse that's doing well would be the number 16 Grand Mo the First. That's one of the Victor Barboza Jr. barn sending out their runner here. And you look at him, he's been based primarily in Florida, whether that be at Tampa or Gulfstream, but he does have that one effort at Santa Anita where they tried him in the Zuma Beach and he really didn't do anything wrong. He was third, he closed from off of it. And you look at him, he's been in the money every single time. I think the thing that we've talked about sort of with Catalytic in the sense that Fierceness was a monster in that race. A lot comes down to the pace of that race. And I thought they kind of let Fierceness have the better jump on several runners in there. But I don't know your thoughts on him. I thought he was a little bit of a reach in the spot, just knowing that several in here have beat him on several occasions.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about the distance with him too. I thought the Tampa Bay Derby, he ran really well. He was getting a pretty good trip that day. So I just don't know if he's going to get a better trip in a race like this than he did that day and not be able to get the job done where we just watched Domestic Product kind of splitting horses that day. So to me, yeah, he's going to really need to step up.
And Mike Rapoli has the favorite and the morning line, the 17 Fierceness. And we'll take a look at his most recent victory, the Florida Derby at Gulfstream Park. And him and Johnny V, they put on a show here. I think once we saw those opening splits, the opening half going 47 and change, 3/4 and 111 and 1, they kind of let him have it his way, and he just dominated here.
Yeah, if we were to run a simulation and we were to run the Derby 100 times, or we were to run it where every single horse got their ideal trip and what would their best race be? If everybody showed up with their A game, Fierceness is the best. Fierceness would win. His ceiling is the highest. But that's not what happens in the Derby generally. You don't always get the trip that you want, the one that you desire. With Fierceness from being outside, could he be hooked very wide? Did he just run one of the best races that he'll ever run? And does he even have another step forward to go? Does he only have backwards to regress a little bit? Could he still regress and win this race? Sure. To me, he's just a horse I have a lot of questions to ask about, Ashley, at a really short price in here. And he's generally not the type of horses I like to bet in the Derby, where he's coming in, he's training so well. Like all the signs coming in is that he's performing well, he's doing well in the mornings. I just don't think he's going to get the perfect trip that he needs. So I'm going to play against Fierceness in this one. And I'll be going elsewhere.
And it's so tough too when you talk about these horses coming out of all these different circuits and tracks and what a moderate pace is. I feel like his last two, they were moderate. And the same can be said about a horse that I kind of made a little bit of a case for, Domestic Product. So it's going to be a very different ball game on Saturday. Now, the number 18 Stronghold, we'll take a look at his win in the Santa Anita Derby. And while I don't feel personally that this field was stacked, I thought the way that he wins this was very impressive. He had to split horses. He kind of had to really dig for it late. And he gets up here and is able to hold off Imagination, who was also a horse that was throwing it down in the stretch, giving it all that he got. And this horse ends up winning by a neck. And he's a horse that I think we've talked about this with a couple of horses. He is taking the right steps forward.
Yeah, I think he could get a good trip in here too. He was sitting just behind horses in the Santa Anita Derby, and he had to wait. He got shuffled back a little bit. Then he was able to push his way through. I don't feel like distance should be an issue for him. He has nice foundation. He has a win at Churchill, so he's run well already over that track. He's not just a horse who was out here in Southern California, maybe beating up on some smaller fields. So I think he's a little under the radar, and in watching his races back, I feel like he might be a little faster overall than his speed figures would suggest. Even if he just had a speed figure that was a few points higher in the Santa Anita Derby, you would feel like he could take a step forward right up into contend with these. So I'd much rather have him wide, Ashley, than down inside for someone who was hoping to play him in some of the exotics. If he's having to sit 3 or 4 wide, I'd much prefer that than down inside and getting shuffled. So he's going to be in a lot of the exotics for me.
And you talked about him getting that win at Churchill. It came at that one turn mile that's so signature to that racetrack. And he finished in front of not only track fandom, but Resilience, who
Yep.
draws post 19 here in the Derby. And he's a horse that when I looked at him, yeah, it took him a little bit to graduate, but they finally got that going at Gulfstream Park. He went a mile and a 16th. He went 2 turns there and he was decisive. And then he came back. They put him in the Risen Star, a big step up. And I don't think he did anything wrong. He kind of chased the pace there and he finished 4th. But when we take a look at the Wood Memorial, I think this is where he kind of shows that he's a developing type. He's taking the step forwards. He got a really nice trip here from Johnny V. Just kind of sat the pace. And then you can see in the stretch, he ends up being much the best in here. He wins by 2 1/4. He finishes in front of Society Man, who has post 20 in the Derby. And I think something about the Bill Mott barn is they get these horses kind of developing race by race. And he took the step forward that he needed to, at least to punch his ticket into the gate.
That was a great way to pass the baton over to me, because for me, it was less about who he was beating and more about how he was doing it visually. Just like you pointed out, you could see that he's stepping forward and maturing and developing, because he actually broke right on top and they could have gone to the lead, but they decided they're going to take back, sit right behind the leaders. And he just looks like he's kind of handy. And you need a horse like that in this type of race. I think they can ask him to run, kind of stop, take back. Okay, let's move out this way. And I was really impressed with that. He's really in a great barn. And both Stronghold and Resilience could sit very similar trips. And I would much prefer them being out wide. Same sort of thing. Stronghold beat him at Churchill, but he's run well there. Lots of positives for a big price.
I think the other thing, too, to point out, he wore blinkers for the first time last time out, and they still were able to have him just sit and then make that move and draw clear. So he will get a new rider, Junior Alvarado. And I say new rider, maybe new rider for him, but obviously we know all the work that him and Bill Mott have done over the years. And mentioned the name Society Man. He's going to round out the main body in the field. Danny Gargan sends this one out. He also has Dornock on the inside. So he's got bookends here of the starting gate. And this is a horse, they threw a lot at him early, right? He started at 6 furlongs, then he had several months off. They put him to a mile and an eighth. They tried him in the Withers. He finally graduated 2 starts back and then just was second best behind Resilience last time out. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with his last 2, but I have some reservations about him in this spot based on the fact that, Resilience beat him. He was a little bit more tactical in terms of the trip, and he's going to be a big price here. But look who's booked to ride, Gino, Frankie Dettori.
Yeah, I would love to see him just facing slightly lesser company than this, because I think he's moving in the right direction. And you pointed out how it sort of tipped their hand, that they've always liked this horse. They were putting him in these longer races because I think they wanted to get him qualified for these big races and see if they could get points. And they did. He just doesn't seem quite as far along right now as some of the others that are just maybe a little further along with their development. I could see him being really nice in a couple months in some of the summer races. I would not be shocked if he's a big player in some of them at a nice price.
We talked about it's all about points and getting into the field. So the 20 is the main body. They're all 2 also eligibles. Excuse me. The 21 Epic Ride and the 22 Mugatu. And in terms of Epic Ride, I think he is probably, in my opinion, the better of the 2 if they were to draw in. I feel like he's got that tactical early foot, and he's been taking step forward similarly to other horses in here. He tried the dirt for the first time last time out, and he actually raced okay, in my opinion.
Yeah. Epic Ride is one that you feel like is actually a horse who has some good recent form. Unfortunately for Mogatu, he's kind of in this by more process of elimination. His recent races haven't been all that great. He was 5th in the Bluegrass, so he just doesn't have any recent form really that seems like it could compete. Epic Ride is for sure a horse that you could see falling into a nice trip. He has some tactical speed. He wasn't that far behind Sierra Leone in just a touch in the Bluegrass. So I agree with you. Of those 2, if he were to draw in, I think he would be able to make a lot more noise.
And you talked about Magatu. The other thing, too, with that runner is obviously they needed points to get in. So he has had a couple of more recent races compared to other horses in this field. So that's the body of the field, Gino. I know based on our conversation, we've had some similar thoughts, and it's top pick time here. And we're on the same horse. A lot of pressure here on Catching Freedom, but I think we have similar thoughts in terms of he did not get the trip that he wanted last time out in Louisiana Derby, and he still ran an incredible race with, I think, that mid-pack trip that maybe he projects to get if all things go well. He could be sitting in the sweet spot.
Yeah, and just can he get the jump on Sierra Leone or some of the other horses coming from way out of it? I have no doubt that he will show up and run a really good race. Is it going to be good enough to win? We will see. Sierra Leone is the horse I used in the second spot. I feel like he's maybe the most likely winner in my eyes. And so at his price, with the possibility, he's the second spot for me. And then I use a couple prices in the third and the fourth spot, Ashley, the ones that are drawn towards the outside. We just went over them. Stronghold and Resilience, who they're proven at Churchill. They're horses that I think might be a little bit faster than their speed figures would suggest. They're recent ones. They're handy, they're tactical, and they can sit nice trips, maybe out in the clear, and hit the board at a big price.
So our top two are the same. I used Domestic Product in the third spot. I've been impressed with him. I like the step that he took forward at Tampa Bay. He was very impressive in those couple strides to the wire. I think he's a horse that should improve stretching out in distance. And we talked about Fierceness. He is a horse that if he wins this race, it wouldn't be a shock. When he is good, he is excellent. But when he has 19 other rivals, just like everyone else in this field, it's a whole different ball game. So 4-2, 15, 17 for me, 4-2, 18, 19 for Gino. It's the Kentucky Derby. It's the first Saturday in May. Best of luck.